The snow had been falling for 3 hours, and my hands had lost all sensation 2 hours before that. Kneeling in the courtyard garden, I felt my knees sink into the frozen earth as I trimmed withered rose branches with shears that seemed like chunks of ice in my grasp. The sharp smell of winter mingled with pine from the decorated evergreens along the palace perimeter. Distant laughter drifted through the air, warm, joyful, the kind that belonged to those who'd spend tonight beside crackling hearths, sipping mulled wine, unwrapping presents tied with satin bows. I wasn't one of those fortunate souls. Christmas Eve at the palace meant twice the labor for half the workforce. The rest, those with families, with little ones waiting at home, had been granted leave. Those of us with nowhere else to be, with no one who'd notice our absence, remained behind. We buffed silver until our own faces stared mockingly back at us. We scrubbed marble that would be soiled again within hours. We assembled banquets we'd never sample. My breath emerged in tiny clouds that vanished almost immediately, like unanswered prayers. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Whitmore, had ordered me to trim the winter garden before the Alpha King's visitors arrived for the midnight festivities. "Make it presentable, girl," she'd snapped, her narrow lips barely parting. "His Majesty demands excellence, particularly tonight." Excellence, as if frozen roses could achieve such a state, as if someone like me ever could. I discovered early that being invisible meant staying alive. Keep your gaze lowered, your hair pulled back tightly under your cap, your voice barely audible when speech became necessary. Never make eye contact with them, especially not with his eyes. But what I didn't know was that tonight, invisibility would fail me, and everything would change forever. Quick pause before we continue. If you're watching this from somewhere in the world right now, let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're enjoying stories like this, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because tomorrow's episode, it goes even deeper than this. The palace hierarchy was merciless. Nobles occupied the summit, ranked wolves of the pack held the middle ground, and at the absolute bottom, omegas and human servants scraped by. I existed somewhere in that forgotten territory between useful and expendable. My mother had served here too. Before the illness claimed her when I turned 12, she'd taught me to navigate these corridors like a phantom, to anticipate requirements before they were voiced, to endure. "We survive by being necessary but never noticed," she'd whispered once, her work-hardened hands tender on my blonde hair, the hair that marked me as different, that attracted unwanted attention in a realm that prized dark beauty and fierce power. I hadn't permitted myself to think of her in months. Grief was an indulgence I couldn't afford. A rose thorn pierced my thumb, releasing blood that appeared shockingly crimson against my pale, frozen skin. I observed it form a bead and drop onto the snow, a minuscule splash of color against all that white. Through the frosted windows inside the palace, I could observe the glow of chandeliers being illuminated, servants in their finest uniforms bearing trays of crystal goblets, musicians preparing their instruments. The celebration would commence in mere hours. The Alpha King would make his entrance, magnificent and fearsome as always, and his court would bow and grovel and vie for his notice. I'd glimpsed him only a handful of times during my 3 years here, always from afar, always in passing. He was the kind of man, the kind of wolf, you sensed before you saw. The atmosphere would shift, growing dense with dominance that made every instinct shriek to submit or run. Tall, with dark hair, possessing eyes that seemed to penetrate flesh and bone to reach whatever trembling truth you attempted to conceal. Rumor claimed he'd seized the throne at 19 after his father perished in the war with the Eastern Pax. They said he'd never chosen a mate, never demonstrated interest in the countless beautiful she-wolves presented before him each season. They said he was frigid, strategic, more beast than man. I believed every whisper. How could I have known that within hours, those same eyes would be staring at me with something that looked almost like desperation? The shears tumbled from my numb fingers, clanging against the stone garden border. When I stooped to recover them, dizziness crashed over me. How long had I been out here? The sky had transformed from gray to deep violet, and the snow fell heavier now, thick flakes clinging to my thin uniform and melting into icy streams down my spine. I should go inside. I should locate Mrs. Whitmore and inform her the garden was as presentable as possible. But movement seemed impossible. My legs refused cooperation. My fingers wouldn't grip the shears. The cold had penetrated so deeply I almost couldn't register it anymore, which some distant corner of my mind recognized as dangerous. Just a moment, I thought. Just sit for a moment. The stone bench beside the rose bed appeared almost welcoming. I collapsed onto it, intending to rest for merely a minute before returning to work. The palace towered above me, all illuminated windows and warm amber light. I could see silhouettes moving inside, people preparing for celebration, for happiness, for connection. And here I sat in darkness and cold, alone as I'd always been. My eyes drifted shut. I thought about my mother, about our final Christmas together before the illness. She'd saved her meager earnings for weeks to purchase me a hair ribbon, pale blue silk that I'd cherished like treasure. I'd worn it until it disintegrated. I wondered what she would think of me now, half frozen in a garden, forgotten by everyone. Somewhere far away, a door opened. Voices carried on the wind, but they seemed insignificant. Everything seemed insignificant except the strange, spreading warmth beginning to replace the cold. I knew dimly that this wasn't warmth, it was my body surrendering, shutting down, but I was too exhausted to care. I'm sorry, Mama, I thought. I tried to be what you taught me. I tried to survive. The voices were intensifying. Footsteps crunching through snow. Someone was shouting, and then everything changed. Powerful hands seized my shoulders, and I forced my eyes open to discover a face hovering above mine, angular, fierce, with eyes that blazed gold in the darkness. "What the hell?" The words severed abruptly. Those golden eyes widened, and I witnessed something like shock ripple across features I'd only ever observed composed and distant. The Alpha King. He'd discovered me here like this. How long has she been out here? The question emerged as a snarl directed at someone beyond my vision. "Your Majesty, we didn't know. Get the physician. Now." I wanted to speak, to apologize for being found, for being a burden, but my lips wouldn't form words. The Alpha King Dominic, I'd heard nobles call him, slid one arm beneath my knees and the other behind my back, lifting me as though I weighed nothing. Heat radiated from him like a furnace, and I couldn't prevent myself from curling toward it, seeking warmth with animal desperation. "Stay with me," he commanded, his voice rough. "Do you hear me? Stay awake." But darkness was pulling at me, soft and insistent. The final thing I registered was his scent, pine and smoke and something wild, and the strange, impossible realization that the most powerful wolf in the kingdom was carrying me like I mattered, like I was worth saving. When I woke, nothing would ever be the same again. I awakened to warmth. Not the insufficient heat of the servants' quarters where we huddled under threadbare blankets 3 to a room, but genuine warmth. The kind that seeped into your bones and made you believe momentarily that the world might not be entirely merciless. My eyes fluttered open to discover myself in an unfamiliar room, surrounded by dark wood furniture and deep burgundy fabrics that spoke of wealth I'd only ever cleaned, never experienced. Panic shot through me. I attempted to sit up, but my body protested with countless small aches. "Easy!" The voice came from beside the bed, and I turned my head to find a woman with silver-streaked hair and compassionate eyes observing me. She wore the crisp uniform of the palace medical staff. "You've had a close call, child. Hypothermia doesn't take prisoners." Where am I?" My voice emerged as a rasp. "The East Wing guest quarters." She pressed a hand to my forehead, checking for fever. "His Majesty insisted you be brought here. Said the servants' quarters weren't suitable for recovery." The Alpha King. The memory crashed back, his face above mine, the shock in his golden eyes, the sensation of being lifted, carried. Heat flooded my cheeks that had nothing to do with my returning body temperature. "I need to get back to work," I said, attempting again to rise. "Mrs. Whitmore will be. Mrs. Whitmore has been informed that you're under the physician's care and will return to duties when cleared." The woman's tone was firm. "Those are the Alpha King's orders, and before you ask, yes, he was quite specific about it." I fell back against the pillows, mind reeling. This didn't make sense. Alpha Kings didn't concern themselves with servants. They certainly didn't carry them inside and issue orders about their care. We were interchangeable, forgettable. That was the entire purpose of our existence. He was, I hesitated, angry. The physician's expression shifted into something I couldn't quite interpret. "Oh, he was furious. I've never seen him like that. But not at you, dear. Never at you." What she didn't tell me was that his fury would change everything, not just for me, but for every servant in the palace. She left me with instructions to rest, pressing a cup of warm broth into my hands before departing. I sat in that unfamiliar luxury, sipping slowly, attempting to piece together what had happened. The Christmas Eve celebration must have concluded hours ago. Pale winter sunlight streamed through the windows, suggesting it was late morning. I'd lost an entire night, and somewhere in this palace, the Alpha King had spent part of his most important social event of the year dealing with a half-frozen servant girl. The door opened again, and I startled so violently that broth sloshed over the cup's rim. But it wasn't Dominic. It was a young maid I recognized from the kitchens, a girl named Riley with worried brown eyes. "Oh, thank the gods you're awake." She rushed to my side. "Everyone's been talking about it. What happened out there?" I told her about the garden assignment, the cold, losing track of time. Riley's face grew darker with each word. "That witch," she hissed. "Mrs. Whitmore knew how cold it was. She sent you out there on purpose." "Why would she?" "Because she's cruel and because she could." Riley sat on the bed's edge, lowering her voice. "You should have heard His Majesty last night. He came into the celebration carrying you, and the entire hall went silent. Then he started asking questions. Who assigned you to the garden? Why no one checked on you? Why a servant was left outside in freezing temperatures during a celebration?" She paused, eyes wide. "He dismissed Mrs. Whitmore on the spot, told her to pack her things and be gone by morning." The cup trembled in my hands. "He fired her. Because of me? Because she nearly let you die from negligence." Riley's expression was fierce. "And that's not all. He's ordered a full review of servant working conditions, better quarters, warmer uniforms for outdoor work, mandatory breaks. Some of the other staff are calling you a hero." I felt sick. "I'm not a hero, I didn't mean for any of this." "Maybe not, but something changed last night." Riley stood, smoothing her apron. "The Alpha King has never paid attention to how servants are treated before. Now he is, and it started when he found you." But what neither of us knew was that the Alpha King's interest in me went far deeper than anyone suspected, and it would put both of us in terrible danger. After she left, I lay back, staring at the ceiling. The room felt too large, too fine, like a costume that didn't fit. I didn't belong here. I belonged in the shadows, in the spaces between important people's lives. This attention, this disruption, it terrified me more than the cold had. 3 days passed. The physician visited twice daily, declaring me recovered but insisting I remain in the guest room per His Majesty's orders. I saw nothing of Dominic himself, though his presence hung over everything. The servants who brought my meals spoke his name in hushed, reverent tones. The new head housekeeper, a stern but fair woman named Mrs. Brooks, mentioned him when she came to assess whether I was fit to return to work. "Take your time," she'd said, not unkindly. The Alpha King was very clear that you're not to be rushed. On the 4th day, I couldn't stand it anymore. I dressed in a fresh uniform that had been left for me, warmer fabric than I was accustomed to, with proper lining, and ventured out of the room. The palace was quieter in the aftermath of Christmas. Most guests departed, decorations being carefully packed away. I made my way down to the servants' wing, seeking something familiar, something that made sense. The other servants greeted me with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Some seemed grateful for the changes Dominic had implemented. Others resented the attention I'd brought, the disruption to the established order. I kept my head down and volunteered for the least desirable tasks, scrubbing pots in the kitchen, hauling coal for the fires, trying to disappear back into my old invisibility. But it was different now. I could feel eyes on me, whispers following in my wake. The girl the Alpha King carried. The one who changed everything, the one he asks about. That last part I learned from Riley, who'd taken to seeking me out during breaks. "He's asking the staff about you," she confided one evening as we polished silver in the butler's pantry. "Wants to know how you're settling back in, if you're being treated well." "Why?" The word burst out before I could stop it. "Why does he care?" Riley gave me a look that suggested I was being deliberately obtuse. "You really don't know." "Know what?" She opened her mouth to answer, but footsteps in the hallway sent us both back to our work, heads bowed, hands busy. The palace was full of ears, and some conversations were too dangerous to have. That night, sleep eluded me, because the answer to Riley's question was about to walk through my door. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment in the garden, Dominic's face, the shock in his eyes, the careful way he'd lifted me. The Alpha King didn't do things without reason. Everything was calculated, strategic. So what did he want from me? The question haunted me through the following week as I fell back into the rhythm of work. I cleaned guest rooms and polished banisters and tried to ignore the weight of confusion that sat heavy in my chest. And then, on a gray afternoon while I was replacing linens in one of the upper floor bedrooms, I heard it, a voice from the hallway that made every nerve in my body stand at attention. "Is she in there?" Dominic's voice. Deep, commanding, unmistakable. "Yes, Your Majesty. The girl you asked about, she's changing the bedding in the blue room." My hands froze on the pillowcase I was holding. The door opened, and I spun around to find him standing in the doorway, filling it with his presence. He wore simple clothes, dark trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. But simplicity did nothing to diminish the raw power that radiated from him. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and those gold eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Leave us," he said to whoever had accompanied him. The door clicked shut. We stared at each other across the expanse of the room. I clutched the pillowcase like a shield, heart hammering so hard I was certain he could hear it. Every instinct screamed to lower my gaze, to submit. But something in his expression held me frozen. "You've been avoiding me," he said finally. The accusation was so unexpected I almost laughed. "I'm a servant, Your Majesty. You're the Alpha King. We don't exactly move in the same circles." Something flickered across his face, amusement, perhaps frustration. You know that's not what I mean. I don't know what you mean at all." The words came out sharper than I intended, born of days of confusion and fear. "I don't know why you carried me inside, why you fired Mrs. Whitmore. Why you're asking about me, I don't understand any of this." He moved further into the room, and I had to fight the urge to back away. "You were dying in my garden. Servants die all the time." My voice went bitter. "We get sick, we get injured, we grow old before our time. It's the way of things. You've never cared before. I've never seen it before." His voice was quiet, almost dangerous. "I've never had to watch someone." He stopped, jaw tightening. "You were so cold. Your lips were blue and you weren't responding. And something in me," he trailed off. In the silence, I found my voice again. "Something in you. What?" Dominic's eyes met mine, and what I saw there stole the breath from my lungs. Not pity, not obligation. Something far more complicated, far more terrifying. "Broke," he said simply. "Something in me broke." And in that moment, I realized the most powerful wolf in the kingdom was just as lost as I was. The silence stretched between us, heavy with words neither of us seemed able to speak. I stood there, still clutching that ridiculous pillowcase, while the alpha king of the entire Northern Territories looked at me like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "You should rest," I said finally, grasping for anything normal, anything that made sense. "You must be exhausted from ruling or whatever it is you do." A small, unexpected smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Whatever it is I do." Heat flooded my face. "I didn't mean I'm sure it's very important. It's incredibly boring most of the time," he interrupted, moving closer, not threatening but deliberate. "Meetings about territory disputes, budgets, trade agreements, listening to nobles complain about things that don't matter." He paused in front of me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. "You're the first interesting thing to happen in years." I cleared my throat. "I'm not interesting. I'm a servant who nearly froze to death because I was too stupid to come inside." "You're not stupid." His voice sharpened. "You were following orders. You were doing what you'd been taught to do, obey, endure, survive. That's not stupidity. That's—" He seemed to struggle for the word. "That's what we've done to you, all of you." I didn't know what to say to that, the Alpha King acknowledging that the system was broken. It felt dangerous, like standing on ice that might crack at any moment. "The changes you made," I ventured. "The new policies for servants, people are grateful, but what? Some are scared too. Change always comes with a price, and they're wondering what you'll want in return." His expression darkened. "I don't want anything in return for treating people with basic dignity. Then you're the first person in power who doesn't." The words slipped out before I could stop them, and I braced for anger. But Dominic just looked at me with something that might have been sadness. "What's your name?" The question caught me off guard. "You don't know my name." "I know what's in your employment file. Eliza Winters, age 23, been working here for 3 years, mother deceased, no other family." He leaned against the bedpost, studying me. "But that's not what I'm asking. Who are you when no one's watching? What do you think about when you're alone? What do you want?" No one had ever asked me that, not in my entire life. I cleared my throat. "I don't know. I want to survive, to have enough to eat, to not be cold. That's existence, not wanting. It's all I can afford." The truth of it hung in the air between us. Dominic looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. A decision being made, walls coming down that I suspected were rarely lowered. "I was 11 when my father went to war," he said quietly. "He left me here with tutors and advisors who were supposed to prepare me to rule. They taught me strategy, politics, how to project strength." His jaw tightened. "They also taught me that emotions were weakness, that caring about individuals made you vulnerable, that a good king thinks of his pack as numbers, not people." I set down the pillowcase slowly, giving him my full attention. "When he died and I took the crown at 19, I believed them. I thought being a good king meant being untouchable, cold, efficient. He met my eyes. And then I found you in the snow, and all of that meant nothing. You were dying, and I couldn't think about strategy or politics or maintaining distance. I could only think about getting you warm, keeping you alive. Why? The question was barely a whisper. I don't know, he admitted. That's the truth. I saw you lying there and something in my chest cracked open, like I'd been holding my breath for years and suddenly remembered how to breathe. He pushed off from the bedpost, taking a step closer. You're going to think I'm insane. I already think you're insane. You're having a conversation with a servant instead of, I don't know, conquering territory or whatever kings do. That surprised a genuine laugh out of him, the sound warm and unexpected. See, interesting. Despite everything, the confusion, the fear, the absolute impossibility of this situation, I felt my lips curve into a small smile. But our moment of connection was about to be shattered by news that would change everything. The moment shattered when the door burst open. A man in military dress strode in, his expression urgent. Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but there's been an incident at the eastern border. The council is convening. He stopped abruptly, noticing me for the first time. His eyes widened slightly. I didn't realize you were occupied. I'll be there shortly, Commander Hayes. Dominic's voice shifted back into that tone of authority, the brief glimpse of vulnerability tucked away. Tell them to start without me. Hayes hesitated, his gaze flickering between us with barely concealed curiosity. Of course, Your Majesty. He bowed and left, but I could feel the weight of what had just happened. Someone had seen us together alone, talking like equals. I should go, I said quickly, already moving toward the door. You have important things to... Eliza. My name stopped me. I turned to find Dominic watching me with an expression I couldn't decipher. This isn't finished. There's nothing to finish. You saved my life, I'm grateful, but you have a kingdom to run and I have beds to make. I tried to keep my voice steady. That's the way things are. What if I want to change the way things are? The question hung in the air, dangerous and thrilling and absolutely terrifying. Then you're going to make both our lives very difficult, I said softly, and slipped out the door before he could respond. I had no idea how difficult things were about to become. The next 2 weeks were a special kind of torture. I threw myself into work, volunteering for every task that would keep me away from the main palace areas. I scrubbed floors in the basement. I organized storage rooms that hadn't been touched in years. I helped in the kitchens during the early morning hours when I knew Dominic would be in meetings. But I couldn't escape him entirely. He found ways to cross my path, always seemingly by accident, always with that intense focus that made me feel like the only person in the room. A chance encounter in the library where I'd been dusting shelves and he'd been looking for a specific treaty document. A moment in the garden, now cleared of snow, where he'd come to inspect the winter damage and found me pruning the roses I'd nearly died beside. Each encounter was brief, proper, observed by others. But there was something in the way he looked at me, the way his voice softened when he said my name, that made it impossible to pretend nothing had changed. The palace noticed. The servants whispered. The nobles began to watch me with calculating eyes. And then came the day Riley found me in the linen closet, her face pale with worry. You need to be careful, she said without preamble. Lady Cassandra has been asking questions about you. My stomach dropped. Lady Cassandra Ashford was one of the most powerful she-wolves in the kingdom, beautiful, cunning, and widely expected to become Dominic's mate. Her family controlled vast territories in the south, and their alliance with the crown was considered essential. What kind of questions? About your family, your background, whether you have any connections. Riley's expression was grim. She's not stupid, Eliza. She sees how he looks at you. He doesn't look at me any particular way, I protested weakly. He looks at you like you're the only real thing in a palace full of pretenders. Riley gripped my shoulders. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying it's dangerous for both of you. That night, I made a decision that would save my life, but not in the way I expected. That night, I lay awake in my narrow bed in the servants' quarters. I'd insisted on moving back despite the new, better accommodations Dominic had ordered, and stared at the ceiling. Riley was right. This, whatever this was, couldn't continue. Dominic was the alpha king. He needed a mate who could stand beside him politically, someone with power and connections. Not a servant with nothing to offer but a stubborn heart and hair too pale for this world. I made a decision. I would request a transfer to one of the outer estates. Distance was the only solution that made sense, but fate, it seemed, had other plans. The attack came 3 days later, just before dawn. I woke to screaming and the acrid smell of smoke. Bells were ringing, the alarm that signaled danger to the palace. I threw on my dress and ran into the hallway to find chaos. Servants rushing in every direction, guards shouting orders, the sound of fighting echoing from somewhere below. What's happening? I grabbed Riley as she ran past. Rogues, they breached the eastern wall. There are dozens of them. Her eyes were wild with fear. They're saying it's an organized attack, that someone let them in. My blood ran cold. An inside job. Betrayal. Where's the Alpha King? Fighting, where else? Riley pulled away. We're supposed to get to the safe rooms, come on. But I couldn't move. Somewhere in this palace, Dominic was facing an enemy that had infiltrated his own home. And all I could think about was that moment in the garden, the shock in his eyes when he'd found me, the way he'd said something in me broke. I'd spent my whole life being invisible, being safe by being unnoticed. But for the first time, I understood that safety wasn't the same as living. I turned and ran toward the sounds of battle, straight into a nightmare I never could have imagined. The eastern corridor was a war zone. Bodies, I couldn't tell if they were guards or rogues, lay sprawled across marble floors slick with blood. The metallic scent hung thick in the air, mixing with smoke and something wilder, more primal, the smell of wolves in battle fury. I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering, every survival instinct screaming at me to turn back. But I kept moving forward, drawn by something stronger than fear. Through the smoke, I could see flashes of movement, guards in palace colors fighting against rogues in mismatched clothing, all teeth and claws and savage desperation. And in the center of it all, I saw him. Dominic fought like the predator he was, all controlled violence and lethal grace. Even in human form, his power was devastating. He moved through enemies like water, each strike precise and brutal. But there were so many of them, and I could see the strategy now. They were trying to separate him from his guards, to isolate him. This wasn't a random attack. This was an assassination attempt. Fall back! Commander Hayes's voice cut through the chaos. Protect the king! But the rogues had anticipated that too. A group of them broke off, engaging the guards while others pressed toward Dominic. I saw one circling behind him, a wicked blade glinting in the firelight. I didn't think. I grabbed a fallen guard's sword, heavier than I expected, the grip still warm, and ran forward. The rogue didn't see me coming. Why would he? I was just a servant, a slip of a girl in a simple dress, not a threat. I drove the blade into his side with all my strength. He roared, spinning toward me with fury in his eyes. I stumbled backward, the sword wrenched from my grip, suddenly very aware that I had no idea how to fight. No training, no strength to match these creatures. He advanced, and I braced for pain. But what happened next would bind Dominic and me together in a way nothing else could. The rogue's head snapped back as Dominic's fist connected with his jaw. The sound of bone breaking was sickeningly clear. Dominic didn't stop. He moved with a violence I'd never witnessed, protecting me with a ferocity that should have terrified me, but instead made something fierce and bright bloom in my chest. When the rogue fell, Dominic turned to me, and the look on his face stole my breath. Not anger at my foolishness, not frustration, something raw and wild and almost desperate. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, even as his hands ran over my arms, checking for injuries. "Saving your life, apparently," I shot back, adrenaline making me bold. "You could have been killed." "So could you." The fighting was dying down around us. The palace guards, reinforced by more soldiers, were overwhelming the remaining rogues. But Dominic's attention was entirely on me, his hands still on my arms, his eyes searching my face like he was memorizing every detail. "You're insane," he said, but there was something like wonder in his voice. "I learned from the best," I replied, and felt my lips curve into a shaky smile. Commander Hayes approached, blood on his uniform, but his expression grim and satisfied. "Your Majesty, we've secured the corridor. The traitor has been identified, one of Lady Cassandra's personal guards. He confessed to opening the eastern gate." The name hit like a physical blow. I saw Dominic's expression shift from concern to cold fury in an instant. "Where is Lady Cassandra?" "In her chambers, Your Majesty." Under guard. Dominic released me, stepping back, and I saw the king replace the man who'd been touching me with such careful concern. "Take her into custody, I want answers." He glanced at Hayes. "And get someone to escort Eliza to safety." "I can escort myself," I interrupted. Both men looked at me in surprise. "I'm not injured. You have more important things to deal with." For a moment, I thought Dominic might argue, but duty was calling and we both knew it. He nodded once, sharp and reluctant, before striding away with Hayes at his heels. I stood in that blood-stained corridor, trembling now that the danger had passed, and wondered what I'd just done. Not the fighting, though that was insane enough, but the way I'd run toward danger instead of away from it. The way I'd chosen him over safety. What I didn't know was that my choice would spark a chain of events that would destroy some lives and transform others forever. The interrogation of Lady Cassandra lasted 2 days. I learned about it the way servants always learn things, through whispered conversations in hallways, through Riley's breathless updates, through the tension that gripped the entire palace. Cassandra had orchestrated the attack. Driven by jealousy and ambition, she'd seen how Dominic looked at me, had understood that her careful plans to become queen were crumbling. So she'd allied with rogue factions, promising them access to palace wealth in exchange for eliminating the king and allowing her family to seize control. She'd underestimated Dominic's strength, and she'd underestimated the loyalty of most of the palace guard. On the 3rd day, she was executed for treason. I didn't watch. I couldn't. Despite everything she'd done, the finality of death sat heavy in my stomach. This was the world Dominic lived in, a world where betrayal meant execution, where every relationship was a potential threat, where trust was a luxury that could get you killed. And yet he'd trusted me, a servant he barely knew. He'd let down his guard, shown me vulnerability, treated me like I mattered. I was cleaning one of the upper sitting rooms when he found me again. A week had passed since the attack, and I'd only seen him from a distance, addressing the court, meeting with advisors, rebuilding security. He looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, tension in the set of his shoulders. "You're avoiding me again," he said, closing the door behind him. "You've been busy." I kept my hands moving, dusting picture frames that were already spotless. Traitors to execute, alliances to repair, king things. "Eliza." The way he said my name made me stop. I turned to find him watching me with an expression that made my heart stutter. "I can't do this anymore," he said quietly. Fear spiked through me. "Do what?" "Pretend that you're just a servant I happened to save. Pretend that you didn't risk your life for me. Pretend that every moment I'm in a council meeting, I'm not thinking about you." He crossed the room, deliberate and purposeful. "Pretend that you don't matter." My voice cracked. "I'm nobody, Dominic. I have no family, no power, no political value. You need a mate who can. I need someone I can trust." He stopped in front of me, close enough to touch. "I need someone who runs toward danger instead of away from it, someone who sees me as a person instead of a crown." His hand came up, fingers brushing my cheek with devastating gentleness. "I need you." And in that moment, my entire world shifted on its axis. Tears burned in my eyes. The court will never accept it. I'm human or close enough. I'm not strong, not connected, not. You stabbed a rogue wolf to protect me. A smile flickered across his face. "I'd say you're pretty strong." That was stupidity, not strength. It was courage. His thumb traced my cheekbone. "It was everything I've been trying to be and failing at for years. You didn't hesitate. You didn't calculate the odds. You just acted because it was right." I closed my eyes, fighting against the hope rising in my chest. "This is impossible." "Most worthwhile things are." He leaned closer, his forehead resting against mine. "I'm not asking you to decide anything right now. I'm just asking you to stop running, to give us a chance. And if it doesn't work, if the court rebels, if your pack refuses to accept, then we'll figure it out together." His voice was absolute certainty. "I didn't become Alpha King by letting others dictate my choices, and I'm not going to start now." The wall I'd built around my heart, the one my mother had taught me to maintain, the one that had kept me safe and invisible and alone, it crumbled. I opened my eyes to find him watching me with such raw honesty that I couldn't look away. "I'm terrified," I whispered. "So am I," he smiled, and it transformed his face from severe to almost boyish. "But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe and alone." I thought about my mother, about her lessons in survival. But she'd also taught me something else, something I'd forgotten. That surviving wasn't the same as living. That sometimes the bravest thing you could do was reach for something more than just getting through another day. I reached up, my fingers threading through his dark hair, and pulled him down to meet me. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, like we were both afraid the other might disappear. But then his arms wrapped around me, solid and real, and I pressed closer, pouring 3 years of loneliness and fear and desperate hope into that contact. He tasted like smoke and winter air and something uniquely him. And when we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, I saw my own wonder reflected in his eyes. "Stay with me," he said against my lips. "Not as a servant, as whatever you want to be. I don't know what that is yet. Then we'll figure it out." He kissed me again, softer this time. Together. But figuring it out would prove harder than either of us imagined, because the announcement that would shake the kingdom was only 3 weeks away. The announcement came 3 weeks later, during the traditional New Year's assembly, when the entire court gathered to hear the Alpha King's proclamations for the coming year. I stood in the great hall among the other palace staff, my new position as personal assistant to the king still feeling like an ill-fitting coat. Dominic had insisted on the title, on bringing me out of the servants' shadows, though we'd both agreed to take things slowly. The court needed time to adjust. I needed time to learn how to exist in this new reality. But as I watched him stride to the dais, magnificent in formal attire, I knew that slow wasn't in his nature. "My people," he began, his voice carrying through the vaulted space. "This past year has brought challenges we never anticipated. Betrayal from within, attacks from without. Moments when the foundation of our kingdom was tested." The crowd murmured agreement. I saw nobles nodding, remembering the chaos of the rogue attack, the revelation of Cassandra's treachery. But it also brought clarity. His eyes found mine across the crowded room, and I felt my breath catch. It showed me that true strength isn't found in political alliances or calculated marriages. It's found in loyalty, in courage, in the willingness to stand beside someone not because you have to, but because you choose to. My heart began to pound. This wasn't the speech we'd discussed. This was something else entirely. Which is why I'm announcing today that I've chosen my mate. The hall erupted, gasps, excited whispers, the rustle of hundreds of bodies turning to look at the eligible she-wolves in attendance. I saw several noble ladies straighten, hope and anticipation on their faces. "Eliza Winters," Dominic said clearly, "please come forward." The world tilted, and nothing would ever be the same again. Every eye in the room swung toward me, and the whispers turned to shocked exclamations. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. A servant. He'd chosen a servant. The scandal of it rolled through the hall in waves. Riley, standing beside me, gave me a gentle push. "Go," she whispered. "He's waiting." Somehow my feet carried me forward. The crowd parted like water, and I was aware of every stare, every judgment, every disbelieving expression. When I reached the dais, Dominic descended the steps to meet me, taking my hand with a gentleness that contradicted the bold declaration he'd just made. "You said slow," I murmured, low enough that only he could hear. "I changed my mind." His smile was small and private. "I've spent too long being what everyone else needed. It's time I chose what I need." He turned back to the assembly, keeping my hand in his. "I know this is unexpected, unconventional. Some of you will object, will cite tradition and politics and the way things have always been done." His voice hardened. "But this is my choice, and I stand by it. Eliza has proven herself worthy in ways that matter, with courage, with loyalty, with a strength that doesn't require power or position." Lord Ashford, Cassandra's father, stepped forward from the crowd, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. "Your Majesty, with respect, this is madness. The girl has no family, no standing, no pack connections. She cannot possibly what?" Dominic's voice dropped to something dangerous. "Lead." She ran toward danger to protect me while trained warriors hesitated. "Inspire loyalty. The servants of this palace have more respect for her than they ever had for your daughter." The words were brutal, pointed. "Your family lost the right to advise me on mates when Cassandra tried to have me assassinated." Ashford's face went purple, but he stepped back, unable to argue. Commander Hayes moved forward, and I tensed, expecting another objection. But he knelt, fist over his heart in formal salute. "Your Majesty has my support. Lady Eliza has proven her worth." One by one, other guards followed suit. Then, to my shock, some of the younger nobles, not all. There were plenty of scandalized faces, plenty of whispered objections, but enough to show that this wasn't complete madness. "The mating ceremony will take place in 1 month's time," Dominic announced. "Those who support this union are welcome to attend. Those who don't," he smiled, sharp and final, "are welcome to leave." The next month would test us in ways we never imagined, but it would also show us what we were truly capable of together. The assembly dissolved into chaos. Some celebrating, others protesting, most simply stunned. Dominic led me from the hall, his hand never leaving mine, through corridors that seemed to spin around me until we reached his private study. The moment the door closed, I turned on him. 1 month, a public announcement without warning me first. My voice came out higher than intended. "Dominic, what were you thinking?" "I was thinking that every day I waited was another day for the court to scheme and plot and try to separate us." He pulled me close, his hands settling on my waist. "I was thinking that I'm tired of hiding what you mean to me. I'm not ready." The admission hurt. "I don't know how to be what you need. I don't know how to stand in front of all those people and be your mate, your equal. You're already my equal." His voice was firm. "You just don't see it yet. They're going to hate me. They're going to say I manipulated you, seduced you, that I'm using you for power. Let them say it." He tilted my chin up, forcing me to meet his eyes. "I know the truth. You know the truth. That's all that matters." But it wasn't all that mattered, and we both knew it. A king couldn't rule with the entire court against him. Political alliances mattered. Pack dynamics mattered. And I was a complication that could destabilize everything he'd built. The next weeks were a blur of preparation and resistance. Dominic hired tutors to teach me court etiquette, pack politics, the intricate dance of noble society. I spent hours learning how to walk properly, speak properly, hold myself like someone worthy of standing beside a king. It was exhausting and overwhelming, and more than once I locked myself in my chambers, no longer the servants' quarters, but a suite near Dominic's own rooms, and cried from sheer frustration. Riley became my anchor, helping me navigate the social minefield. "Ignore Lady Hartford," she'd advise as we walked through the gardens. "She's just bitter that her daughter wasn't chosen. But Lady Chen, Mrs. Brooks's sister, actually, she's sympathetic. Win her over and you'll have an ally." I learned to tell the difference between genuine objections and political maneuvering. Some nobles truly believed a servant couldn't be queen. Others just wanted to see if I could be intimidated into withdrawing. And a few, a precious few, seemed willing to give me a chance. Dominic was my other anchor, steady and unmovable in his support. He included me in council meetings, asked my opinion on matters of state, made it clear that I wasn't just a romantic choice, but a partner he valued. At first, the council members barely tolerated my presence. But slowly, grudgingly, some began to listen when I spoke. It helped that I'd grown up in the palace, that I knew the servants' perspective on policies that looked good on paper but failed in practice. When the council debated new housing regulations, I could point out the flaws from lived experience. When they discussed food distribution, I knew which areas were being underserved because I'd worked in those kitchens, seen those storage rooms. "She has value," I overheard Lord Thorne tell Commander Hayes one afternoon. "Unconventional value, perhaps, but value nonetheless." It wasn't acceptance, but it was a start. The real test, however, came from an unexpected source, and it would determine whether I'd ever truly be accepted as queen. The real test came 2 weeks before the ceremony. A delegation arrived from the Eastern Territories, Alpha Jackson Blackthorn and his pack, here to assess whether they would recognize the mating or withdraw their alliance. Jackson was young, only a few years older than Dominic, but he commanded one of the largest packs in the kingdom. His support was crucial. I met him at a formal dinner, dressed in a gown that cost more than I'd earned in a year as a servant. Dominic sat beside me, his hand occasionally finding mine under the table in silent support. Jackson watched me throughout the meal with calculating amber eyes. Finally, he set down his wine glass and addressed me directly. "Tell me, Lady Eliza," he said, his tone conversational but his gaze sharp. "What makes you think you can be queen?" The table fell silent. Every noble present leaned forward, waiting for my answer. This was the question, the one that mattered. I could feel Dominic tense beside me, ready to defend, but I squeezed his hand gently. This was my battle to fight. "I don't think I can be queen," I said honestly. "Not the way queens have traditionally been. I wasn't raised in politics. I don't have centuries of noble bloodline or strategic alliances to offer." Jackson's eyebrow rose. "Then why accept the position?" "Because Dominic needs someone who sees the kingdom differently. Someone who knows what it's like at the bottom of the hierarchy, who understands that laws and policies affect real people with real struggles." I met his gaze steadily. "I can't negotiate trade agreements or command armies, But I can tell him when a new tax will starve the lower packs. I can identify corruption before it spreads. I can be the voice for people who have never had one. I cleared my throat. And you think that's enough? I think it's necessary. I paused. You asked what makes me think I can be queen. The truth is, I'm terrified I'll fail. But I'm more terrified of what happens if everyone in power only listens to other people in power. That's how you get leaders like Lady Cassandra. That's how betrayal takes root. Jackson studied me for a long moment, then unexpectedly he smiled. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Probably both, I admitted. He laughed, genuine and warm. I like her, he told Dominic. She's got spine. He raised his glass. You have the Eastern Territories' blessing, Your Majesty, and our friendship, Lady Eliza, if you'll have it. Relief flooded through me so powerfully I nearly shook. Dominic's hand tightened on mine, and when I glanced at him, the pride in his eyes made my throat tight. After that, the remaining resistance began to crumble. Not all of it. There would always be those who disapproved, but enough that the path forward became clearer. But even with the path clear, the night before the ceremony would bring doubts that nearly broke me. The night before the ceremony, I couldn't sleep. I stood on the balcony of my chambers, wrapped in a thick robe against the winter cold, staring out at the garden where everything had started. The roses were budding now, spring pushing through winter's grip, new growth after desolation. Having second thoughts, Dominic's voice came from behind me. I turned to find him leaning in the doorway, dressed casually in just trousers and a loose shirt. We'd been careful to maintain propriety before the ceremony, but apparently he'd decided tonight that didn't matter. Third and fourth thoughts, actually, I said. I'm somewhere around my 100th doubt. He crossed to me, wrapping his arms around me from behind, his warmth seeping through the robe. Tell me, what if I'm not enough? What if I make a mistake that costs you politically? What if you're exactly what this kingdom needs? He interrupted gently. What if your mistakes are actually the course corrections we've needed for years? What if being enough means being yourself instead of trying to fit a mold that was never meant for you? I leaned back against his chest. When did you become so wise? When I almost lost the only person who makes me want to be better. He pressed a kiss to my temple. You changed everything. That night in the garden, I was going through the motions, ruling because it was duty, existing because I had to. And then I saw you, and I remembered what it felt like to care about something beyond politics and power. I was literally dying. That's a low bar for memorable. You were dying, but you were still you. Still kind. I found out later that you'd given your warmer cloak to another servant before going out to the garden. Still selfless. Still fighting to survive even when everything was against you. His hand cupped my face. That's the person I fell for. Not some imagined perfect queen, but you. Tears slipped down my cheeks. I love you, I whispered. I'm terrified and overwhelmed and completely out of my depth, but I love you. I love you too. He kissed me softly. And tomorrow, everyone will know it. Tomorrow would be the beginning of everything. A servant becoming queen, a love story that would reshape a kingdom, and a life neither of us had dared to dream possible. The ceremony was held in the great hall, transformed by flowers and candlelight into something magical. I wore a gown of deep silver blue that Riley had helped me choose, my blonde hair left loose in waves that caught the light. As I walked down the aisle, I saw the faces of the court, some approving, some still skeptical, but all watching. But I only had eyes for Dominic, standing at the altar in formal black, his expression almost reverent as I approached. The ceremony itself was traditional, the vows ancient. But when it came time to exchange personal promises, Dominic took my hands and spoke from his heart. I promise to honor not just who you are, but who you're becoming. to stand beside you, not above you, to build a kingdom where people like you, people with courage and compassion and strength that doesn't need power to prove itself, are valued as they should be. My own vows came through tears. I promise to be brave when I want to hide, to speak truth even when it's uncomfortable, to stand with you against whatever comes, because you saw me when I was invisible and loved me when I was just trying to survive. When the officiant pronounced us mated, when Dominic kissed me in front of the entire court, the applause was thunderous. Not universal. I could see a few stony faces in the crowd, but overwhelming nonetheless. The celebration lasted into the night. I danced with Dominic, with Jackson, with Commander Hayes, with nobles who weeks ago wouldn't have acknowledged my existence. Riley cried happy tears and hugged me so hard I couldn't breathe. The servants I'd worked alongside for years congratulated me with genuine warmth, pride that one of their own had risen so high. As the evening wound down, Dominic and I slipped away to the quiet of our private chambers. The rooms were filled with flowers, the fire burning warm and bright. "Your Majesty," I teased, pulling him close. "Whatever shall we do with the rest of our evening?" "I have some ideas," he murmured against my neck. "But first," he pulled back, reaching into his pocket. "I have something for you." He handed me a small box. Inside was a delicate ring, not ornate or jeweled, but simple silver with an inscription inside: strength and compassion, courage and kindness. "It's perfect," I whispered. "You're perfect." He slid it onto my finger. "My queen, my mate, my Eliza." We stood there in the firelight, holding each other, and I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from freezing in a garden to standing beside the most powerful wolf in the kingdom, from invisible to essential, from merely surviving to truly living. It wouldn't always be easy. There would be political battles to fight, nobles to win over, policies to change. There would be days when I doubted myself, when the weight of the crown felt too heavy, but I wouldn't face them alone. "Tell me something," Dominic said quietly. "That night in the garden before I found you, what were you thinking about?" I considered lying, softening it, but we'd built this relationship on truth. I was thinking that I was tired of just existing, that I wanted to matter even if I didn't know how. I looked up at him, at this man who'd seen past every wall and barrier, who'd chosen me when logic said he shouldn't. Now I know that mattering isn't about power or position. It's about choosing to show up, to be brave, to love even when it's complicated. I smiled. "You taught me that." "We taught each other," he corrected. "You showed me that strength isn't about being untouchable. It's about being vulnerable enough to let someone in." Outside, snow began to fall again, not the deadly storm of that Christmas Eve, but gentle flakes that caught the moonlight like stars. Through the window, I could see the palace gardens, the roses we'd both nearly lost ourselves to, now safely dormant and waiting for spring. Everything had changed, and everything was just beginning. In the years that followed, I would help Dominic transform the kingdom, advocating for the powerless, implementing reforms that protected servants and lower-ranked wolves, creating a court that valued capability over birthright. There would be challenges. An attempt by Lord Ashford to undermine my authority that ended with his exile. A difficult pregnancy that nearly cost us both our lives, but ultimately blessed us with a daughter who inherited her father's strength and her mother's compassion. Moments of doubt when the weight of responsibility felt crushing. But there would also be triumphs. The day the first common-born wolf was appointed to the council. The establishment of schools for servant children. The slow but steady shift in how the kingdom viewed worth and value. And through it all, Dominic beside me, my partner, my love, my anchor in storms. Riley became my personal attendant and closest advisor, eventually mating with Commander Hayes in a ceremony we hosted with joy. Jackson remained a trusted ally, his friendship proving invaluable during territorial disputes. The palace itself changed, becoming a place where people like I had been could see paths forward beyond just survival. And on quiet nights when the weight of the crown felt too heavy, Dominic would find me in the garden, our garden, and remind me of that Christmas Eve when everything changed. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked him once, years later, after a particularly difficult council session where several nobles had questioned my judgment. "Regret finding the love of my life freezing in the snow." He pulled me close, his arms strong and sure around me. "Never, not for a single moment. Even when I make your life complicated. Especially then." He kissed my forehead. "You made my life worth living. Everything else is just details." And standing there in the moonlight, surrounded by roses that had survived winter and bloomed again, I finally understood what my mother had been trying to teach me all along. Survival wasn't the goal. Living was. Loving was. Finding the courage to reach for something more than just getting through another day. I had been invisible once, forgotten and freezing in a garden while celebration happened without me. But I wasn't invisible anymore. I was seen, valued, loved, not despite who I'd been, but because of it. I was the servant who became queen, the girl who nearly died and learned to truly live, the woman who proved that sometimes the greatest strength lies in the gentlest heart, and I was exactly where I was meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more incredible stories waiting on your screen. If this one hit you, tap to watch the next, and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. Oh, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see where you're watching from.